In the ancient kingdom of Azahar, where the desert winds carry whispers of spirits, Leila kneels at the sacred altar for the 5th consecutive day. Her slender fingers trace the intricate patterns carved into stone as she waits for her promised spirit husband to appear. The villagers watch from a distance, some with pity, others with reverence. They know the legends. Once every century, a woman is chosen to bridge the mortal and spirit realms through marriage. Leila was marked at birth with the crescent moon behind her ear, the undeniable sign. The memory comes to Leila as she waits, her mother's hands trembling as she bathed her 7-year-old body in rosewater. "Must we continue this path?" her mother had whispered to the village elder, Mistress Fadwa, who stood watching with ancient eye. "The mark does not lie," Fadwa had replied, her weathered finger tracing the crescent moon birthmark behind Leila's ear. "She belongs to the spirits." Leila had not understood then what it meant to be chosen. She only knew that the other children were no longer allowed to play with her, that her meals were taken alone, and that her education would be different. Scrolls of spirit lore instead of household management, prayers instead of play. Her father had swelled with pride. "Our family is blessed," he would tell visitors, presenting his daughter like a prized possession. "The spirits have chosen our blood." The crescent moon amulet, heavy silver on a delicate chain, was placed around her neck on her 8th birthday. "Never remove it," Mistress Fadwa had instructed. "It is the beacon that will guide your spirit husband to you when the time comes." For 18 years Leila had prepared. She learned the ancient languages to speak with her future husband. She memorized the sacred texts that detailed the duties of a spirit bride. She purified her body with fasts and her mind with meditation. Other girls her age were married with children by now. Leila watched them at the well. Their ordinary happiness like a life glimpsed through sheer curtains, visible but untouchable. "Will my spirit husband be kind?" she had once asked Mistress Fadwa. The old woman's eyes had narrowed. "Spirits are not kind or cruel as humans understand such things. They are powerful. Power is its own virtue." Leila touches the amulet now, feeling its familiar weight against her collarbone. 5 days ago, Mistress Fadwa had prepared her for the waiting ritual, washing her hair with sacred oils, painting her palms with henna patterns meant to attract spiritual energies. "You must remain at the altar for 5 days, she had instructed. "No food, minimal water. Your sacrifice demonstrates your worthiness." The first day had been easy, filled with anticipation. Leila had knelt proudly, feeling the eyes of the village upon her. Children had peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, awed by the spectacle of the spirit bride in her ceremonial white robes, the gossamer veil covering her face. The second day brought hunger pangs that she mastered through meditation. The third day, a terrible thirst that made her tongue stick to the roof of her mouth. The fourth day, dizziness and strange visions. Were they messages from her spirit husband, or merely the effects of fasting? And now, the 5th day, with the sun setting and no spirit husband in sight, Leila shifts her weight slightly, her knees aching against the hard stone. In her childhood imaginings, her spirit husband had been beautiful and wise, with eyes like stars and a voice like the desert wind. He would take her to his realm, where she would never know pain or hunger again. She would be his emissary to the human world, bringing blessings to her village, ensuring bountiful harvests and healthy children. "Your sacrifice ensures our survival," Mistress Fadwa had told her countless times. "Since the first spirit bride 1,000 years ago, our village has prospered while others withered in the desert." A small lizard scuttles across the altar, pausing to look at Leila with unblinking eyes. In her light-headed state, she wonders if this could be her spirit husband in disguise, testing her. But no. The texts described grander signs: whirlwinds of sand, lights in the sky, the scent of rain in the arid air. None of these have appeared. The crescent moon amulet feels suddenly heavy, like a shackle rather than an honor. What if there is no spirit husband? What if the stories are merely that, stories told to explain why some girls are born different, marked in ways that set them apart? As darkness begins to fall over the desert, Leila's certainty falters for the first time in her life. The first day of waiting had begun with the ritual of invitation. Before dawn, Mistress Fadwa had led Leila to the altar, her ceremonial veil worn by every spirit bride since the first floating behind her like morning mist. The gossamer fabric, impossibly delicate after centuries of use, remained intact through what the villagers called spirit blessing. "Remember," Mistress Fadwa had whispered as she arranged the veil over Leila's head, "you must not move from this spot. Your stillness is your strength." The old woman had then anointed Leila's forehead with sacred oil, her wrists with essence of night-blooming jasmine. "To awaken the senses of the spirit world," she explained. As the sun rose, Leila had begun the first invocation, her voice clear in the morning air. "I am the vessel, the bridge between worlds. I offer myself as companion, as wife, as servant to the blessed realms. Come forth, my husband, claim what has been promised." The village had gathered at a respectful distance, silent witnesses to the ancient ceremony. Leila had felt their gaze upon her back as she knelt, proud and determined. By midday, her knees had begun to ache. By sunset, she had recited the invocation 100 times. The second day brought the ritual of purification. Mistress Fadwa returned at dawn with a copper bowl of sacred water. "You may drink 3 sips, no more," she instructed, holding the bowl to Leila's lips. The water tasted of minerals and herbs, cleansing, purifying. After, the elder circled Leila with burning sage, the smoke curling around her still form. "This cleanses your aura, makes you visible to spirit eyes." Leila had remained perfectly still, though her muscles screamed for movement. The texts were clear. Any significant movement could break the spiritual connection being formed. That night she thought she heard whispers on the wind, words in a language she almost understood. Signs that her spirit husband was drawing near. The third day brought the ritual of offering. Mistress Fadwa placed a small clay bowl before Leila. 3 drops of your blood, freely given," she said, offering a small silver knife. Leila pricked her finger without hesitation, watching as 3 perfect crimson drops fell into the bowl. This was the sacrifice that sealed the covenant. Blood for protection, blood for prosperity, blood for power. The village elder then placed 3 items around the bowl: a sprig of dried lavender for fertility, a small piece of obsidian for protection, and a grain of desert salt for preservation. "Your spirit husband will choose which matters most to him," Fadwa explained. "This will reveal his nature." That evening, as the sun set, Leila had seen shadows moving differently at the edges of her vision. The lavender sprig had shifted slightly in the windless air. A sign. By the 4th day, hunger clawed at her stomach, and thirst made her thoughts hazy. The ritual of endurance required no actions, only suffering borne with dignity. Her lips were cracked, her throat parched. The ceremonial white robes felt heavy on her weakened body. Mistress Fadwa came at noon, her face solemn. "Your suffering honors him," she said simply. "The greater your pain, the greater his pleasure in ending it." For the first time, Leila felt a flicker of unease at these words. Why would her future husband desire her pain? But the thought was fleeting, lost in the haze of dehydration and hunger. That night, a sandstorm had approached the village, howling like a living thing. The villagers took it as a powerful omen spirit. Husbands often arrived with displays of natural power. Leila had felt a surge of renewed hope, despite her weakened state. The wind had caressed her face through the veil, almost like fingers testing the texture of her skin. "He comes," Mistress Fadwa had announced to the village. "Prepare for the blessing of his arrival." But morning came, and with it clear skies. No spirit husband had materialized. The sandstorm had passed, leaving only a fine layer of dust on the altar and on Leila's veil. Now, on the 5th day, she performs the final ritual, the ritual of submission. No words, no movements, only perfect stillness and the emptying of her mind to create space for her husband's presence to fill. The empty water bowl sits before her, a reminder of her sacrifice. Her mouth is so dry she can no longer swallow. Her vision blurs at the edges. Faith, she reminds herself. Faith is all that matters now. The fourth day had dawned with cruel brightness, the desert sun piercing through Leila's closed eyelids, as if determined to deny her even the small mercy of rest. Her throat felt like it had been scrubbed with sand, her lips cracked and bleeding. The empty water bowl mocked her from its place on the altar. 3 days without proper water, 3 days of the burning sun and cold night. Her white ceremonial robes were now stained with dust, sweat and small spots of blood from where her knees had split open against the stone. Patience, she whispered to herself, the word barely audible. Patience is the virtue of a spirit bride. As the morning progressed, Leila's vision began to swim. The distant dunes seemed to ripple and shift like waves on an ocean she had only heard about in traders' tales. Was this dehydration, or was the veil between worlds thinning? She blinked slowly, and for a moment thought she saw a figure standing atop the furthest dune, tall and impossibly still, watching her. When she opened her eyes again, it was gone. A mirage, she told herself, though her heart quickened. Or perhaps a visitation. By midday, the hallucinations grew stronger. The carved patterns on the altar stone seemed to move beneath her fingers, ancient symbols writhing like snakes. The air shimmered with heat, and within that shimmer, Leila thought she could see faces, beautiful, terrible faces, with eyes like the night sky. "Are you there?" she whispered. "Have you come for me at last?" No answer came but the hot desert wind. Mistress Fadwa arrived as the sun began its descent, her wrinkled face creased with concern as she noted Leila's deteriorating condition. "You are doing well," the elder said, though her eyes betrayed her worry. "Your suffering has meaning. Your spirit husband will reward your dedication." "I saw something," Leila managed to say, her tongue thick in her mouth. "Figures in the desert, faces in the air." The elder's expression sharpened. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Leila described the tall figure on the dune, the faces in the heat shimmer. With each detail, Mistress Fadwa's expression grew more animated. "These are signs," she said, her voice hushed with reverence. "Your spirit husband approaches. He tests the strength of your devotion before revealing himself." "When?" Leila asked, unable to keep the desperation from her voice. "Patience," Mistress Fadwa reminded her, echoing Leila's earlier thought. "The spirits move according to their own time, not ours." As the elder turned to leave, she hesitated, then placed a small flask beside the empty water bowl. "One small sip," she instructed, "no more, to ensure you survive until tomorrow's culmination." After Fadwa departed, Leila stared at the flask. One sip would hardly ease her suffering, but it might keep her conscious for what was to come. With trembling fingers, she uncorked the flask and allowed herself the promised sip. The water felt like liquid life flowing down her parched throat. As twilight approached, the wind began to rise, softly at first, then with increasing intensity. Villagers scurried to secure loose items and animals. In the distance, a great wall of sand rose up, tinted red by the setting sun. "A sandstorm," murmured the villagers who had come to observe the day's ritual. "An omen." The elders of the village gathered at the edge of the sacred space, watching the approaching storm with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Spirit manifestations often accompanied natural disturbances. This was written in the ancient texts. "He comes," called out Mistress Fadwa, her arms raised to the darkening sky. "The spirit husband approaches with the sands of time." The villagers fell to their knees, heads bowed. Only Leila remained upright, her posture perfect despite her exhaustion. The storm drew closer, the howling wind carrying strange harmonics that almost sounded like voices. Within the swirling sands, Leila thought she could see shapes forming and dissolving, a hand reaching out, eyes gleaming, the suggestion of a face, both beautiful and terrifying. "I am ready," she whispered into the wind. "I have waited for you all my life." The storm engulfed the altar, surrounding Leila in a whirlwind of sand and sound. The villagers cried out in fear and awe as she disappeared from their sight, wrapped in the embrace of the storm. Inside the whirlwind, Leila felt strangely calm. The sand should have scoured her skin raw, but instead felt like countless gentle caresses. The wind should have deafened her, but instead whispered secrets in a language just beyond her understanding. "Are you my husband?" she asked the storm. "Have you come to claim me at last?" The winds seemed to respond, swirling more tightly around her. For a moment Leila felt a presence ancient, powerful, inhuman, considering her with cold curiosity. Then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the storm passed, the winds died down. The sand settled. Leila remained alone at the altar, unchanged except for the fine layer of red sand covering her from head to toe. Dawn of the 5th day broke with merciless clarity. No clouds softened the sun's assault. No wind stirred to cool Leila's fevered skin. The red sand from yesterday's storm had settled into the creases of her ceremonial robes, making them appear streaked with blood. Whispers reached her from the village. The 5th day, still no sign. Perhaps she was never truly chosen. Leila closed her eyes against their doubt, which too closely mirrored her own. 5 days. The texts were clear. The spirit husband would come within 5 days of the waiting ritual. Today was her last chance. "Please," she whispered, though her cracked lips made even this simple prayer painful. "I have prepared my whole life for you." As the morning aged, villagers gathered at a respectful distance. Some came to pray for her success, others to witness her failure. Mistress Fadwa stood apart from them all, her ancient face unreadable. "The waiting ends at sunset," the elder had reminded Leila before dawn. One way or another, by midday Leila's condition had deteriorated further. Her vision blurred, the world dissolving into smears of color and light. The hunger had transcended pain, becoming a hollow emptiness at her core. Thirst was her only remaining sensation, a burning demand that consumed all thought. It was in this state, hovering between consciousness and delirium, that Leila first noticed the small figure approaching. Unlike the other villagers who maintained the traditional boundary around the sacred altar, this shape moved directly toward her. Leila blinked, trying to clear her vision. A child, a boy of perhaps 7 years, was walking purposefully across the sacred ground. Gasps arose from the watching villagers. Even Mistress Fadwa seemed too shocked to intervene. The boy stopped, directly before the altar. He carried something clutched in his small mons, a wooden toy camel, lovingly carved and worn smooth from handling. "Are you the spirit lady?" he asked, his voice clear and unafraid. Leila stared at him, unable to comprehend this breach of sacred protocol. No one approached a waiting bride. It was forbidden. "Yes," she finally managed to whisper. "I am waiting for my spirit husband." The boy nodded solemnly, as if this confirmed something important. He was a handsome child, with serious dark eyes and a determined set to his jaw. "My name is Tamir," he said, holding out his toy camel as if in offering. "This is Samir. He helps me be brave, despite everything, her pain, her delirium, the shocked silence of the watching village." Leila felt a smile crack her dry lips. "Hello, Tamir," she said. "Hello, Samir." The boy looked at her with intense curiosity. "You've been here a very long time." 5 days, she agreed. "Without water, very little." Tamir frowned, clearly troubled by this information. "My father says people need water every day or they die." "Your father sounds wise," Leila said, warmth spreading through her, despite her physical discomfort. There was something about this child, a directness and innocence untainted by the village's superstitions. "He is," Tamir agreed proudly. "He knows everything about the desert and the trading routes. He's been all the way to the Great Sea." The boy stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Are you really going to marry a ghost?" The question, so innocent yet so piercing, struck Leila like a physical blow. "A spirit," she corrected automatically. Not a ghost. But you can't see him, right? And he doesn't talk to you. Tamir persisted. He communicates in different ways, Leila said, suddenly uncertain how to explain the complex spiritual tradition to a child. Tamir considered this with the serious contemplation only children can bring to bear. Then, with breathtaking simplicity, he asked, "Will you marry my father instead?" The question hung in the air like a mirage. Leila felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her knees. "What?" she managed. "My father needs a wife. I need a mother." Tamir stated these facts with matter-of-fact clarity. "You're very pretty, even though you're dirty right now, and you seem nice." Behind Tamir, the villagers had begun to stir from their shocked immobility. Mistress Fadwa was hurrying forward, outrage evident in every line of her ancient body. "Child," the elder called, "you desecrate sacred ground. Come away at once." But Tamir stood his ground, his small face determined as he held out his wooden camel to Leila. "Here, Samir will keep you company until you can meet my father." Before Leila could respond, strong hands were pulling Tamir away. The boy resisted, dropping his precious toy at Leila's knees. "His name is Karim," Tamir called as he was dragged back toward the village. "My father's name is Karim." Leila stared after him, stunned by the encounter. Then her gaze dropped to the wooden toy camel, Samir lying in the dust before her. With trembling fingers, she reached out and picked it up, feeling the smooth wood warm beneath her touch. "Karim," she whispered, the name unfamiliar yet somehow comforting on her parched lips. And for the first time in 5 days, Leila wondered if perhaps her destiny might not be what she had always believed. The commotion following Tamir's departure had barely settled when a new figure approached from the village. Where the boy had been small and quick, this man moved with deliberate purpose, his tall frame cutting a commanding silhouette against the desert landscape. The villagers parted before him, their expressions a mixture of scandal and fascination. Even Mistress Fadwa stepped aside, though her disapproving gaze followed his progress. Leila knew without being told that this was Karim, Tamir's father, the man the boy wanted her to marry. He stopped at the appropriate distance from the altar, maintaining the sacred boundary that his son had breached. Unlike the other villagers, he looked directly at Leila, meeting her gaze without hesitation or superstition. "Forgive my son," he said, his voice deep and clear. "He does not understand the importance of your ritual." Leila studied him through her veil. Karim was perhaps 30 years old, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, dark like his son's, held intelligence and something else, a sadness that seemed to have settled into the fine lines at their corners. "There is nothing to forgive," she replied, surprised at how steady her voice sounded despite her weakened state. Karim glanced at the wooden toy camel that now sat beside Leila on the altar. A look of recognition, then resignation crossed his features. "He gave you Samir." "Yes. It is his most precious possession." Leila touched the smooth wooden figure. "I will return it to him." "Keep it for now," Karim said. "It would honor him to know it stays with you until—" He hesitated, then finished. "Until your vigil ends." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. The unspoken question hung in the air. What if her spirit husband never came? "Tamir mentioned you are a merchant," Leila said, seeking safer ground. A small smile softened Karim's serious expression. "Yes, I lead caravans to the coastal cities and back. We trade desert salt and dates for cloth and spices. You've seen the Great Sea then, many times. It stretches beyond sight like the desert but made of water that moves constantly, never still." Leila tried to imagine such a thing, an endless expanse of water, but her mind, clouded by thirst and fatigue, couldn't conjure the image. "Your son is very direct," she said. At this, Karim's smile broadened briefly before fading. "Yes, his mother was the same way. She spoke her mind without fear or hesitation. She died bringing him into the world." Karim's voice remained steady, but Leila saw how his hand unconsciously moved to touch a small leather pouch hanging from his belt, a trader's ledger, worn with age and constant handling. "I'm sorry," Leila said, and meant it. Karim inclined his head in acknowledgement. "It was a long time ago." "Not so long, if your son is only 7. Their eyes met again, and something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of shared understanding. Despite their different paths, both knew what it meant to be shaped by expectations not entirely of their own making. Mistress Fadwa chose that moment to approach, her staff tapping sharply against the hard-packed earth. "The spirit bride must not be disturbed with worldly matters," she said, her voice brittle with authority, "especially not on this final day of waiting." Karim turned to face the elder, respectful but unintimidated. "I came only to apologize for my son's intrusion, and you have done so," Fadwa replied coldly. "Now leave her to her sacred duty." For a moment it seemed Karim might argue. Instead, he bowed slightly to the elder, then turned back to Leila. "I wish you success in your vigil," he said formally, though his eyes conveyed something more complex. "May you find the destiny that brings you true happiness." As he turned to go, Leila found herself wanting to call him back. There were questions she wished to ask about the world beyond Azahar, about the great sea and the coastal cities, about what it might be like to live as an ordinary woman, not one marked by spirits. But propriety and tradition held her silent. She watched as Karim walked back toward the village, his figure growing smaller with distance. Only when he had disappeared from sight did Leila realize she was still clutching the wooden camel. She set it carefully beside the empty water bowl, this small token of human connection next to the symbol of her spiritual sacrifice. From the edge of the sacred space, Mistress Fadwa watched her with narrowed eyes. "Do not let your mind wander to earthly distractions," the elder warned. "Your spirit husband approaches. I feel his presence growing stronger with the waning day." Leila nodded obediently, but her thoughts remained with the merchant and his son, their direct gazes, their straightforward words. There had been no mysticism in their interaction, no ancient ritual or sacred protocol, just human connection, simple and true. For the first time in her life, Leila wondered if perhaps such connections might be worth more than all the spiritual promises she had been raised to revere. The afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the western dunes, casting long shadows across the sacred space. Leila watched an hourglass filled with red sand, placed before her by Mistress Fadwa, marking the remaining hours of her vigil. Each grain that fell seemed to whisper accusations of failure. "The spirit husband often arrives at the final moment," Mistress Fadwa had assured her, though doubt had crept into even the elder's voice. The texts speak of testing the bride's faith to its limit. The village had grown restless as the day progressed. More people gathered to witness the conclusion of the ritual, their murmurs carrying to Leila's ears. Perhaps the mark was misinterpreted. No spirit bride has failed in living memory. What becomes of her if he doesn't come? This last question haunted Leila most. What indeed would become of her? She had been raised apart, educated differently, prepared for a destiny that now seemed increasingly uncertain. She had no husband, no skills for ordinary village life, no place in the world of humans if the spirits rejected her. The sun touched the horizon. 1 hour remained. Leila's parched lips moved in desperate prayer. "I have waited faithfully. I have endured the trials. I have prepared my mind and body as the texts instruct. Please come for me. Do not leave me in this void between worlds." As if in answer, the desert wind rose suddenly, whipping her veil around her face. The watching villagers gasped, many falling to their knees in anticipation. Mistress Fadwa raised her arms to the sky, her voice cracking with emotion. "He comes. The signs are fulfilled." Leila's heart raced. Was this finally the moment? After 5 days of suffering, would her spirit husband materialize before the assembled village, proving her worth and validating her lifetime of preparation? The wind swirled around the altar, lifting sand in spiraling patterns. Within those patterns, Leila thought she could almost see a form taking shape. tall, inhuman, powerful. "Yes," she whispered, "I am ready." But as quickly as it had risen, the wind died away. The sand settled. The shape that had seemed to be forming dissipated into nothing more than drifting dust. Silence fell over the gathered crowd. Then, from the back of the assembly, a small figure darted forward, evading the hands that reached to stop him. Tamir again, running toward the altar with something clutched in his hands. This time his father followed close behind, his face a mask of concern. "Stop, child," called Mistress Fadwa. "You will bring disaster upon us all." But Tamir paid no heed. He reached the altar and thrust a small water skin toward Leila. "You need to drink," he said, his young face serious with concern. "Father says 5 days without proper water is dangerous." Leila stared at the offered water skin. To accept it would violate the ritual's strictures, yet her body cried out for relief. Behind Tamir, Karim stood at the boundary of the sacred space, his expression torn between respect for tradition and concern for her well-being. "Please," Tamir insisted, "just a little." Mistress Fadwa had reached them now, her staff raised as if to strike the water skin from the boy's hands. "The ritual must not be interrupted, not when we are so close." "Close to what?" Karim's voice cut through the tension, calm but challenging. "She has waited the full 5 days prescribed in your texts. Where is this spirit husband?" The elder turned on him, fury in her ancient eyes. "You question traditions older than your family line, merchant. You, who spend half your life among foreigners with foreign ways." "I question anything that causes needless suffering," Karim replied, his gaze shifting to Leila. In that moment, with the sun half set and the hourglass nearly empty, Leila remembered something her mother had whispered to her once, when no one else could hear. "The spirit husbands never truly come in the form promised," her mother had said, her voice tight with some unspoken fear. "Be careful what you wish for, my daughter." At the time, Leila had dismissed it as her mother's mundane fear of the spiritual realm. Now she wondered. "The water, please," she said to Tamir, her voice barely audible. The boy stepped forward, past Mistress Fadwa's restraining hand, and offered the water skin again. Leila took it with trembling fingers and raised it to her lips. The water was cool and sweet, like nothing she had ever tasted before. "Sacrilege," cried Mistress Fadwa. "You risk everything." But Leila could not bring herself to care. The water revived her parched body, cleared her mind. She looked up at Karim, who watched her with a mixture of approval and concern. "Thank you," she said simply. "The ritual is compromised," Mistress Fadwa announced to the gathered village. "The spirit husband may reject her now. Or perhaps," Karim suggested quietly, "he never intended to come at all." The last grains of red sand fell through the hourglass as the sun disappeared behind the dunes. Leila's 5 days of waiting had ended, not with the arrival of a spirit husband, but with an act of human kindness that felt more real than all the mystical promises she had been raised to believe. Night descended over the desert, bringing with it a chill that penetrated Leila's thin ceremonial robes. The villagers had dispersed, their murmurs of disappointment and speculation fading into the darkness. Only Mistress Fadwa remained, her ancient face drawn with concern and something that might have been fear. "You must remain at the altar until dawn," the elder instructed. "Sometimes the spirit husbands come in darkness, when human eyes cannot witness the union." Leila nodded, too exhausted to argue. The small amount of water Tamir had brought had revived her somewhat, but 5 days of exposure and fasting had taken their toll. Her body felt impossibly heavy, anchored to the stone altar as if it had become part of it. "I will return at first light," Mistress Fadwa said, then hesitated. "Pray, child, pray as you never have before." After the elder had gone, Leila sat in the profound silence of the desert night. Stars emerged overhead, countless points of light in the vast darkness. She had always been taught that spirits dwelled among those stars, watching the human world with ancient, patient eyes. "Are you there?" she whispered to the night sky. "Did I fail some test I didn't understand? Or was it all just stories to explain why some of us are born different?" No answer came but the soft whisper of sand shifting in the night breeze. From her robe, Leila withdrew a small object, the two paths stone she had carried since childhood. It was an ancient divination tool, a flat river stone with a natural vein of quartz that forked like a path diverging in two directions. Spirit brides consulted it at moments of uncertainty. Her fingers traced the smooth stone surface, feeling the forked path beneath her sensitive fingertip. "Show me my destiny," she murmured, closing her eyes and casting the stone before her on the altar. When she opened her eyes, the moonlight illuminated the stone, the quartz veins gleaming silver. The stone had landed with the fork pointing away from her, one path leading back toward the village, the other toward the open desert. What did it mean? The traditional interpretation would suggest one path led to the human world, the other to the spirit realm. But both paths led away from the altar, away from her current position of waiting. Perhaps that was the message. Perhaps waiting was no longer her destiny. As this thought formed, Leila noticed a figure approaching from the direction of the village. For a breathless moment, she wondered if this might be her spirit husband at last, materializing in human form to claim her. But the figure's outline was familiar. Karim the merchant, moving with quiet purpose across the sand. He stopped at the boundary of the sacred space. "Forgive the intrusion," he said softly. "I couldn't leave you alone in the cold." He held out a blanket, warm and thick, the kind desert travelers used against the night's chill. Leila hesitated. To accept would be another violation of the waiting ritual. But had the ritual not already failed? Had she not already been rejected? "Thank you," she said, taking the offered blanket and wrapping it around her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and profound, bringing tears to her eyes. Karim remained at the boundary, respectful of the sacred space, despite his skepticism of its purpose. "The village is in turmoil," he said. "No spirit bride has failed in 3 generations." "Failed," Leila repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. "Yes, I suppose I have." Or perhaps, Karim suggested gently, "you have been free." The thought was so startling, so contrary to everything she had been taught, that Leila could only stare at him. "What will happen to you now?" he asked. It was the same question that had haunted her throughout the day. "I don't know. There are no instructions for a bride who is not claimed." Karim was silent for a moment, then said, "My son is quite taken with you." Despite everything, Leila felt herself smile. "He's a remarkable child. He sees clearly without the veil of tradition or superstition." Sometimes I think children understand more than we give them credit for." "He asked me to marry you," Leila said, the words emerging before she could consider their implications. In the moonlight, she saw Karim's expression shift, surprise giving way to something more complex. "Yes," he acknowledged. "He's been without a mother for 7 years. He doesn't remember Samira, but he feels her absence nonetheless." "I know nothing of being a wife or mother," Leila admitted. "I was trained only to be a spirit bride." "Perhaps that's not so different," Karim's. "Both require devotion, patience and love." Love. The word hung between them, unexpected and powerful. Spirit brides were not taught to love their husbands, only to serve them, to bridge the worlds of spirit and flesh. Love belonged to the human realm of messy emotions and unpredictable outcomes. Leila looked down at the 2-path stone, still resting on the altar before her. 2 paths, both leading away from where she sat. A choice to be made. "I must return to the village at dawn," she said finally. "The elders will decide my fate." Karim nodded, accepting this without argument. "Whatever they decide," he said, "know that there is a place for you in my home, should you wish it. Not as a servant or a symbol, but as yourself, whoever that might be when you are free to discover it." He bowed slightly, then turned to go, leaving her with a gift greater than the blanket that warmed her body. He had given her a possibility, a future she had never imagined for herself. As she watched him disappear into the darkness, Leila picked up the 2-path stone and held it tightly in her palm. For the first time in her life, she felt the power of choice, her choice, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. Dawn arrived with harsh clarity, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Mistress Fadwa appeared as the first rays touched the altar, her expression grave as she surveyed Leila and the foreign blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "He did not come," the elder stated flatly. It wasn't a question, but Leila answered anyway. "No." The old woman's shoulders sagged slightly, the first sign of vulnerability Leila had ever witnessed in her. "The Council of Elders awaits you. Come." The walk back to the village seemed impossibly long to Leila's weakened body. Each step was an effort, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Yet she refused assistance, determined to return with what dignity remained to her. Villagers lined the path, their faces a mixture of pity, disappointment, and in some cases, barely concealed fear. A failed spirit bride was unprecedented in living memory. What did it mean for their village, for the covenant they believed protected them from the desert's harshest aspect? The Council of Elders had gathered in the village square, seated in a semicircle on carved wooden chairs that were brought out only for the most significant occasions. At the center sat the head elder, Mahmoud, clutching his ornate staff of office, a gnarled piece of ancient wood, topped with a silver crescent moon. Leila stood before them, conscious of her disheveled appearance. 5 days of dust, sweat and suffering had transformed her from the pristine bride who had begun the waiting ritual into something wild and unkempt. "Leila, daughter of Ibrahim," Mahmoud intoned formally, "you were chosen by the mark of the crescent moon to become a spirit bride, to bridge our world with the realm beyond. You have completed the waiting ritual, yet no spirit husband has claimed you. How do you account for this failure?" The question hung in the air. The crowd that had gathered fell silent, waiting for her response. Leila raised her chin. "I cannot account for it, elder. I followed all the rituals as prescribed. I waited with faith and devotion. If there was some failing, it was not in my heart or actions." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Such a response bordered on defiance. An elder woman to Mahmoud's right spoke next. "Perhaps the mark was misinterpreted. Not every crescent-shaped birthmark signifies a spirit bride." "The mark is unmistakable," Mistress Fadwa countered sharply. "I have seen 3 spirit brides in my lifetime. Her mark is as clear as any." "Then perhaps," suggested another elder, "the girl herself is flawed in some way, invisible to our eyes, but apparent to the spirits." Leila felt heat rise to her cheeks. To be discussed as if she were not present, as if she were a defective object rather than a person, stoked a anger she had never allowed herself to feel before. "Or perhaps," came a voice from the crowd, "the spirits themselves have changed their ways." The crowd parted as Karim stepped forward, his face composed but determined. Tamir stood beside him, small hand clutched in his father's larger one. Mahmoud frowned. "This is a matter for the council, merchant. Your travels may have given you knowledge of distant lands, but not of our spiritual traditions." "With respect, elder," Karim replied, "I speak not of foreign ways but of observation. The waiting ritual has failed for the first time in generations. Either the girl is flawed, which seems unlikely given her evident devotion, or the spirits have withdrawn their interest in such unions." Or he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps the unions themselves were never what we believed them to be." Outraged gasps rose from many in the crowd. Mahmoud's knuckles whitened around his staff. "You suggest our sacred traditions are based on falsehood?" the head elder demanded. "I suggest only that we consider all possibilities," Karim said evenly, "including the possibility that Leila's freedom from this obligation might be a blessing rather than a failure." Leila stared at him, startled by his public defense. No one had ever spoken for her this way. Mahmoud rose from his seat, his elderly frame straightening with the authority of his position. "You overstep, merchant. This council will deliberate on the girl's fate without your interference." "And what fate did previous councils decide for rejected brides?" Karim persisted. "Since you have no precedent in living memory." An uncomfortable silence fell. Finally, Mistress Fadwa spoke, her voice low. The ancient texts suggest such women were once exiled from the village. It was believed their rejection brought ill fortune. Exile, Leila whispered, horror washing through her. That was in harsher times, Mahmud said quickly. We are not so cruel now. Then what? Leila asked, finding her voice at last. What becomes of me? The elders exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this question, despite having summoned her for judgment. It was Tamir who broke the uncomfortable silence, his child's voice clear in the hushed square. She could marry my father. Then she wouldn't have to leave. All eyes turned to the boy, who stood his ground with remarkable composure. For a child of 7, the spirits didn't want her. Tamir continued with simple logic. But we do. Mahmud's stern expression softened slightly at the child's words. He looked from Tamir to Karim, then to Leila. Is this your wish? He asked her directly. To set aside your sacred calling and become a merchant's wife? Before Leila could answer, Mistress Fadwa interjected. The signs may yet manifest. Sometimes the spirit husbands test the chosen one's faith by apparent rejection. We should allow time. How much time? Karim interrupted. Another 5 days of waiting. Another month. Would you have her waste her life waiting for a husband who shows no sign of existing? The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Mahmud struck his staff against the ground, calling for silence. A compromise, he announced. Leila will have 1 full cycle of the moon to receive any delayed sign from the spirit realm. During this time she will be returned to her family's home, no longer sequestered as a bride in waiting. If at the end of this period no sign has appeared, she will be free to determine her own fate. The council nodded in agreement, relieved to have found a middle path that neither completely abandoned tradition nor condemned Leila outright. As the crowd began to disperse, Leila caught Karim's eye. He gave her a small nod, part acknowledgement, part promise. 1 month to decide her fate, 1 month to choose between the path she had been raised to follow and one she had never dared imagine for herself. A week passed since the council's judgment. Leila had been returned to her parents' home, where her mother tended to her weakened body with quiet efficiency, and her father avoided her eyes, ashamed of what he perceived as her failure. Neither spoke of what might happen when the moon completed its cycle. On the 8th day, a message arrived from Karim, carried by Tamir himself. The boy stood proudly at their doorway, dressed in his finest clothes. My father invites Leila to share the evening meal with us, he announced with formal dignity that sat amusingly on his small frame. If her parents permit it, Leila's mother looked uncertain, glancing toward her husband for guidance. Spirit brides were traditionally kept apart from village life, and even though Leila's status was now ambiguous, old habits remained strong. Her father frowned. The merchant is forward in his attentions. Please, father, Leila said quietly. The council granted me freedom to move within the village during this time. It would be rude to refuse such a kind invitation. Perhaps it was the novelty of hearing his daughter express a personal desire, something spirit brides were trained not to do, that swayed him. He nodded curtly. Until sunset only. You will return before dark. Tamir beamed, taking Leila's hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Father has prepared something special, he confided as they walked through the village. He's not usually the one who cooks, but today he insisted. Leila felt curious eyes follow their progress. Villagers paused in their daily tasks to watch the failed spirit bride walking hand in hand with the merchant's son. Some nodded politely. Others quickly looked away as if her presence might bring misfortune. Karim's home stood at the edge of the village, larger than most, but still modest. A small courtyard surrounded by a low wall offered privacy from the street. Inside the courtyard, Leila was surprised to find a riot of greenery, potted plants thriving despite the desert climate. Father brings seeds from every journey, Tamir explained, noticing her wonder. He says every living thing can adapt if given proper care. The house itself was a revelation to Leila. Unlike the austere quarters where spirit brides were housed, or the simple practicality of her parents' home, Karim's dwelling reflected a life well-traveled. Colorful rugs from northern kingdoms layered the floors. Copper lanterns from the coastal cities hung from the ceiling. Shelves displayed curious objects from distant lands, carved figurines, unusual shells, small bottles of colored glass. Most striking was a small lamp that burned in an alcove near the door. Unlike the practical oil lamps used throughout the village, this one was made of delicate alabaster that glowed with warm amber light. "That was Samira's lamp," Tamir said softly, following Leila's gaze. "Father keeps it burning always." "The widow's lamp," Leila murmured, recognizing the tradition from her studies. In ancient times, it was believed that the light guided the departed spouse's spirit home for visits. "Welcome to our home," Karim said, appearing from what must be the cooking area. He wore a simple tunic, his sleeves rolled up, a light dusting of flour on his forearms. The domestic image was so at odds with his usual composed merchant appearance that Leila couldn't help but smile. "Thank you for the invitation," she replied formally, suddenly aware of how little experience she had with ordinary social interactions. Spirit brides were taught the protocols for communicating with spirits, not the simple art of friendly conversation. "Tamir, show Leila the garden while I finish preparing the meal," Karim suggested. The boy eagerly led her back to the courtyard, proudly pointing out plants and explaining their origins with the detailed knowledge of a child who has absorbed a beloved parent's passion. "This one sleeps during the day and only blooms at night," he explained, pointing to a plant with tightly closed buds. "Father says it's like people, some shine brightest under the moon rather than the sun." When they returned inside, Karim had set a low table with a simple but appetizing meal, flatbread still warm from baking, a fragrant stew of lentils and vegetables, dried fruits, and small pastries drizzled with honey. "It's not as elaborate as the coastal city fare," he apologized, "but desert cooking has its own honest appeal." They ate sitting on cushions around the table, Tamir chattering happily about his day at the village school, Karim occasionally prompting Leila with gentle questions about her recovery, carefully avoiding any mention of spirit husbands or her uncertain future. The normality of it all, this family meal, this comfortable home, affected Leila more deeply than she could have anticipated. In the spirit bride quarters, meals were solemn, silent affairs, each bite taken with ritualistic mindfulness. Here, food was meant to be enjoyed, conversation to flow freely. "You have a beautiful home," Leila said, as they finished the meal. "I've never seen so many treasures from different lands." Karim smiled. "Each object carries a memory of the place it came from. When winter confines us to the village, these things remind us that the world is vast and varied." "Tell Leila about the great sea, father," Tamir urged. Karim's eyes lit up. "It stretches beyond sight, changing color with the sky. Blue on clear days, gray when storms approach. Gold at sunset, and it moves constantly. Great swells of water, rising and falling like the desert breathes." "It sounds terrifying," Leila admitted. "It was, the first time. Now I find it comforting. The sea reminds us that change is the only constant. Fighting against it only brings suffering." His words resonated with something deep within Leila. Her entire life had been structured around unchanging tradition, rigid expectations. What might it be like to embrace change instead? As the sun began to set, Leila reluctantly rose to leave. "I promised my father I would return before dark." "I'll walk with you," Karim offered. "Me too," Tamir insisted. As they walked back through the village, Leila was acutely aware of how they must appear to others, like a family. The thought should have disturbed her, should have felt like a betrayal of her spiritual calling. Instead, it settled within her like a small, warm coal, glowing with unexpected possibility. 2 weeks into her month of waiting, Leila had fallen into a new rhythm of life. During the days, she helped her mother with household tasks, relearning skills she had set aside during her years of spiritual training. In the afternoons, she often found herself at Karim's home, where Tamir would eagerly show her his latest school lessons or treasures discovered in the market. Karim himself was a respectful presence, never pressing beyond the boundaries of friendship, yet Leila couldn't help noticing how his eyes followed her movements, how he seemed to brighten when she arrived and grow quiet when she left. The villagers had begun to adjust to her ambiguous status. Some still averted their eyes when she passed, but others nodded in greeting, a few even stopping to exchange pleasantries. Life continued, as it always did, adapting to changed circumstances like water flowing around stones. "Tomorrow is special," Tamir announced one afternoon as Leila helped him practice his writing. "Father says we must leave before dawn. Will you come with us?" "Where are you going?" Leila asked, curious. "It's a secret," the boy replied with a mysterious smile. "Father said to ask you, but not to tell you why." Later, when Karim returned from supervising the loading of his caravans for an upcoming trading journey, Tamir immediately bounded over to him. "I asked her, Father, just as you said." Karim's expression was a mixture of amusement and mild embarrassment. "I had planned to extend the invitation myself, with a bit more explanation." "Explanation of what?" Leila asked. "There's a place, about 2 hours' ride from the village," Karim said. "Something happens there once a year, always on the same day. Tomorrow, I thought you might like to see it, if your parents permit." There was a boyish uncertainty in his manner that Leila found endearing. This confident merchant, so assured in his business dealings, seemed almost shy when speaking to her directly. Her parents offered surprisingly little resistance to the excursion. Perhaps they too were adjusting to her new status, or perhaps they had seen the growing connection between her and the merchant family and had begun to consider it as a potential solution to their dilemma. Dawn found Leila waiting outside her parents' home, dressed in practical traveling clothes rather than the ceremonial garments of a spirit bride. Karim arrived with 3 camels, one for each of them. "You know how to ride?" he asked. In theory, Leila admitted, spirit brides learn about many things they never actually do. He helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Tamir, already settled on his smaller camel, bounced with excitement. "It's the best day of the year," the boy declared, as they set off. "Even better than the spring festival." Their journey took them deep into the desert, following paths only Karim could see. He led them confidently, occasionally pointing out landmarks or interesting rock formations. Leila found herself mesmerized by the changing landscape, so different from the static view she had known from the village. Finally, they crested a dune and Karim raised his hand for them to stop. Below them lay a shallow depression in the desert floor, unremarkable except for a faint green tinge to the sand. "We're early," Karim said, checking the position of the morning sun. "Good. We'll have the best view." They dismounted and settled on a blanket Karim spread at the edge of the depression. From his saddlebag, he produced a small feast. Dried fruits, nuts, sweetbread, and cool water in clay containers that kept it fresh, despite the growing heat. "Now we wait," he said, offering Leila a cup of water. "It won't be long." Tamir could barely contain his excitement, fidgeting as he ate, his eyes constantly darting to the green-tinged sand below. As the sun climbed higher, Leila noticed a subtle change in the depression. The green tinge was becoming more pronounced, small specks of color appearing across the surface. "What's happening?" she asked. "Watch," Karim said softly. Before her eyes, the desert floor began to transform. Tiny shoots pushed through the sand with visible speed, unfurling into stems and leaves. Then, as if responding to some secret signal, flowers began to bloom, hundreds of them, thousands, in every color imaginable. Within minutes, the barren depression had become a lush garden of improbable beauty. "Desert roses," Karim explained, his voice gentle with wonder, despite having witnessed the phenomenon before. "They lie dormant beneath the sand all year, seeds and roots preserved in the dry earth. One specific day, when the angle of the sun is exactly right, they bloom together. By sunset they will have already seeded for next year and begun to wither. By tomorrow there will be no sign they ever existed. Leila stared in awe at the riot of color and life that had erupted from the seemingly barren ground. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she whispered. "Can we go down now, father?" Tamir pleaded. At Karim's nod, the boy scrambled down the gentle slope toward the flowers, careful not to trample them as he moved among the blooms with practiced reverence. "He's like a different child here," Karim observed, "usually so energetic and boisterous. But among the flowers, he's gentle as a desert breeze." Leila watched the boy crouch to examine a particularly vibrant crimson bloom. "You've raised him well," she said. "I've done my best," Karim replied, "but he needs more than I alone can give him." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken yet unmistakable. "Come," he said after a moment, offering his hand. "The flowers look even more remarkable up close." They descended together to join Tamir among the blooms. The air was sweet with fragrance, alive with the soft buzzing of desert insects drawn to this brief explosion of life. Leila knelt beside a cluster of delicate white flowers, their centers a deep indigo blue. "In my spiritual training, we learned that flowers represent the transient nature of physical beauty," she said. "But these, knowing they bloom for just one day, makes them more beautiful, not less." "Perhaps," Karim suggested, "it is their very impermanence that makes them precious." As Leila looked up at him, a sudden breeze swept through the depression, lifting petals into the air around them, like colorful snowflakes. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. The man, the child, the woman, surrounded by dancing petals in a moment of perfect, fleeting beauty. Then Tamir's delighted laugh broke the spell, as he tried to catch the swirling petals. Leila found herself laughing too, a free and unrestrained sound she had never heard from her own lips before. 3 weeks had passed, and the moon was waxing toward fullness. With each passing day, Leila found herself less concerned with spiritual visitations and more drawn to the simple pleasures of human connection. Yet questions lingered in her mind, doubts that had taken root during her failed vigil and grown stronger with each sunset that brought no sign from the spirit world. What if the entire tradition of spirit brides was built on misunderstanding? What if generations of marked girls had waited for husbands who never truly existed as they were described? These thoughts led Leila to the village archives, a small mud-brick building where the oldest scrolls and texts were preserved. As a spirit bride in training, she had studied selected portions of these texts under Mistress Fadwa's strict supervision, but certain scrolls had always remained off-limits, accessible only to the most senior elder. "I wish to research the history of spirit brides," Leila explained to the elderly archivist, a hunched man named Hassan, who had tended the village written knowledge for over 4 decades. Hassan peered at her over spectacles made of polished crystal. "A curious request from one who has lived that history," he remarked. "I have lived my portion of it," Leila corrected gently, "but I seek to understand those who came before me." The old man considered her for a moment, then nodded. "The public records are available to all villagers. You may study them here." For several days, Leila pored over yellowed scrolls and crumbling tablets, piecing together fragments of information about previous spirit brides. The official accounts were predictably uniform: young women chosen by the crescent mark, trained in spiritual matters, and eventually wed to spirit husbands in ceremonies witnessed only by the village elders. These unions were credited with bringing prosperity to Azahar, protecting it from the worst of the desert's harshness. Yet Leila noticed troubling patterns. None of the accounts included the spirit bride's own testimonies. Their fates after the ceremonies were described vaguely, if at all, and most concerning, every generation saw fewer spirit brides identified. Where once there might be 3 or 4 marked girls in a generation, recent centuries had produced only one. On the fourth day of her research, as she was about to leave the archives, a weathered hand caught her sleeve. Hassan, who had observed her studies with growing interest, glanced around to ensure they were alone. "There are other texts," he whispered. "Not in the public section." Leila's heart quickened. "The restricted scrolls. I cannot access those." "No," the old man agreed, "but I can tell you what they contain. I have been archivist for 43 years. I have read everything in my care, regardless of restrictions." He led her to a small alcove at the back of the archives, where a threadbare rug offered minimal comfort for conversation. "The oldest texts tell a different story of the spirit brides," Hassan began, his voice barely audible. "The first unions were not celebrations, but sacrifices." "Sacrifices?" Leila echoed, a chill running through her despite the day's heat. Hassan nodded gravely. "The ancient desert people believed that powerful spirits controlled the water sources. In times of severe drought, they would offer a young woman, always one born with the crescent mark, as a bride to appease these spirits. And did it work? Did the droughts end? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But over centuries, the practice evolved from desperate sacrifice to honored tradition. The weddings became more elaborate, the preparation of the brides more extensive. Leila's mind raced, connecting this new information with her own experience. What happened to the brides after the ceremony? Hassan hesitated, then reached beneath his robe and withdrew a small scroll, its edges frayed with age. "This is forbidden knowledge. Mistress Fadwa would have my position if she knew I showed it to you." The scroll was small enough to fit in Leila's palm, bound with a faded red cord. With trembling fingers, she untied it and unrolled the delicate parchment. It contained a first-person account, written in an ancient dialect that Leila could just barely decipher from her training. The writer identified herself as Nura, a spirit bride from nearly 300 years ago. "After the ceremony, I was taken to the deep desert and left alone." Leila read aloud in a whisper. "They said my husband would come for me there, away from human eyes. 3 days I waited. No spirit came, only thirst and sun and sand. When I tried to return to the village, I was driven away with stones. They said I was no longer human, that I belonged to the spirit world now, whether my husband claimed me or not." Leila looked up at Hassan, horror dawning on her face. "They abandoned her to die in the desert. That was the true ceremony," the old archivist confirmed grimly. "The visible waiting ritual was merely preparation. The actual wedding was the bride's journey to the afterlife, where she would presumably meet her spirit husband." "Murder," Leila whispered, "disguised as sacred tradition. In the oldest times, yes. But Nora's account marked a turning point. She survived by finding a nomad camp. Her written testimony eventually reached our village and prompted reforms. The abandonment practice was officially ended." "Officially," Leila repeated, catching his implication. "But unofficially," Hassan's roomy eyes held hers. "There are no accounts from any spirit bride after her wedding ceremony. Not one, in all our records." A new scroll caught Leila's attention, partially visible behind Hassan's seated form. Unlike the ancient texts she had been studying, this one appeared relatively new, sealed with the Elder Council's distinctive wax emblem. "What is that?" she asked, pointing. Hassan followed her gaze and sighed. "The record of all spirit brides from the past century, including their departures." "Show me," Leila demanded, her voice stronger than she intended. With obvious reluctance, Hassan retrieved the scroll and broke the seal. Leila scanned the neat columns of names and dates, her blood running cold as she recognized a pattern. Every spirit bride was recorded as having departed with her husband within 1 month of her wedding ceremony. None had been seen in the village again. "They still send them away," she whispered. "Even now," Hassan nodded sadly. "The methods have become more humane. The brides are given provisions, even a small amount of gold." They are told to start a new life elsewhere, as their presence in the village after failing to ascend to the spirit realm would bring misfortune. Exile, Leila said, just as Mistress Fadwa mentioned. Yes, but with a pretense of spiritual union rather than acknowledged banishment. Leila rolled the scroll carefully and returned it to Hassan. Thank you for showing me the truth. As she left the archives, her mind whirled with implications. Had she narrowly escaped death in the deep desert, or merely delayed an inevitable exile? And most troubling of all, did the village elders, did Mistress Fadwa know the full truth of what they perpetuated? The day after Leila's discovery in the archives, strange weather descended upon Azahar. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, unusual for the season. The air grew heavy with moisture that never quite manifested as rain, teasing the parched earth with promises unfulfilled. In the village square, elders gathered around the ancient Weatherstone, a smooth oval of pale green rock that had rested on its pedestal for countless generations. Normally the color of new leaves, the stone had darkened to a deep emerald, its surface gleaming with an inner light that spoke of disturbances in the natural order. A spirit storm approaches, Mistress Fadwa announced to the anxious villagers. One not seen in living memory. Leila, passing by on her way to draw water, paused at the edge of the gathering. Since her discoveries in the archives, she had avoided the elder woman, uncertain whether Fadwa was complicit in the dark truth of the spirit bride tradition, or merely another link in a chain of deception that stretched back centuries. The spirits are displeased, the old woman continued, her eyes finding Leila in the crowd. The balance has been disrupted. Murmurs spread through the assembled villagers, and more than a few glances turned toward Leila. She felt their unspoken accusation like physical pressure against her skin. The well in the eastern fields has run dry, announced a farmer, stepping forward. For the first time in 20 years, 2 of my goats were found dead this morning, added another villager. No marks, no signs of illness. They simply stopped living. Each new report increased the tension in the square. Leila began to back away, but Mistress Fadwa's voice stopped her. Leila, daughter of Ibrahim, come forward. Reluctantly, Leila approached the Weatherstone and its circle of elders. Fadwa's ancient face was impassive, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made Leila shiver despite the oppressive heat. The signs are clear, the elder said. Your rejected spirit husband stirs in anger. His desire for you has turned to wrath. I did not reject him, Leila replied, keeping her voice steady. He never came. Perhaps he came in ways you failed to recognize, Fadwa countered. Perhaps your heart was already turned elsewhere, closed to his spiritual approach. A ripple of whispers passed through the crowd at this barely veiled reference to Leila's growing relationship with Karim and his son. The village suffers for your unfaithfulness, said one of the male elders, a man who had rarely spoken directly to Leila throughout her years of training. What would you have me do? Leila asked, addressing the entire council rather than just Mistress Fadwa. The waiting ritual ended. The council itself granted me a month to await further signs. And signs have come, Fadwa said grimly, but not the ones we hoped for. The clouds overhead darkened further, casting the village square into premature twilight. A gust of hot wind scattered dust and debris across the gathering. The spirit husband demands what is his, Fadwa declared. The village will suffer until he is appeased. Fear rippled through the crowd, tangible as the wind that tore at their robes. Leila felt the weight of their collective gaze, the silent plea that she sacrifice herself to save them all. Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tense atmosphere. Interesting how these spirits only seem to cause trouble when your authority is questioned. Mistress Fadwa, Karim strode into the square, his trader's robes billowing in the strange wind. Unlike the fearful villagers, he moved with confident purpose, coming to stand beside Leila. You speak of matters beyond your understanding, merchant, Fadwa snapped. Do I? Karim's voice remained calm, reasonable. I have traveled to 36 villages across the Great Desert. Only Azahar maintains this spirit bride tradition. Only Azahar suffers these convenient spiritual visitations whenever the old ways are challenged. Outraged gasps rose from the elders, but many of the younger villagers exchanged thoughtful glances. "You bring foreign ideas to poison our traditions," accused one of the elder men. "I bring observations," Karim corrected. "The well in the eastern fields runs dry because it has not been properly maintained in 2 seasons. I reported this to the Water Council myself after returning from my last journey." He turned to address the goatherd, who had reported his dead animals. "And your goats, Faisal, did they not graze near the western ravine, where the bitter nightshade grows? The plant that is spreading because the village council redirected funds from weed clearing to rebuilding the elders' meeting hall." The goatherd blinked in surprise. "How did you know where my goats grazed?" "Because I pay attention to this village and its needs," Karim replied. "All of its needs, not just the ones that maintain old power structures." Mistress Fadwa's face had darkened with each word. "You overstep, merchant. The council has tolerated your foreign ways because your trade brings wealth to Azahar. But do not mistake tolerance for acceptance, and do not mistake fear for respect," Karim replied evenly. "These good people deserve the truth, not superstition used as a tool of control." The tension in the square had shifted, the villagers' fear now mingled with confusion and the first stirrings of doubt. Leila felt something changing in the very air around them. Not the oppressive weight of impending disaster, but the electric charge of awakening minds. "Blasphemy," Fadwa hissed. "You will doom us all with your disrespect." As if in response to her words, lightning split the dark sky overhead, followed almost instantly by a crack of thunder that shook the ground beneath their feet. The weatherstone pulsed with emerald light, casting eerie shadows across the square. Fadwa raised her arms dramatically. "Behold, the spirits themselves respond to his sacrilege." But Karim simply looked up at the roiling clouds, unimpressed. "That, Mistress Fadwa, is a thunderstorm, a natural phenomenon that has occurred since long before humans invented spirits to explain it." He turned to Leila, his expression softening. "Come, this will break soon, and the streets will flood. Tamir is worried about you." Leila hesitated, torn between decades of conditioning to obey the elders and her growing conviction that Karim spoke truth they had long denied. "The month is not yet complete," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "I will honor the council's original judgment and await the full cycle of the moon before making my decision." With that, she turned and walked away from the Weatherstone, from Mistress Fadwa, from the weight of the village's expectations. After a moment's pause, Karim fell into step beside her. Behind them, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall on Azahar, a village that had not seen proper rainfall in 3 years. The rain lasted through the night, a gentle but persistent downpour that turned the village's dusty paths to mud and filled the collection cisterns to overflowing. By morning, the strange clouds had dispersed, leaving the sky a clear, washed blue that seemed to mock Mistress Fadwa's predictions of spiritual wrath. Leila spent the day helping her parents secure their home against water damage, a task so unusual in the desert village that many of the younger residents had no memory of its necessity. As she worked, she overheard snippets of conversation from neighbors and passers-by. First, no spirit husband appears. Then rain comes when Mistress Fadwa claims the spirits are angry. The merchant made sense. The eastern well has been neglected. Perhaps the old ways aren't the only way. Seeds of doubt had been planted, and the rain, rather than confirming the elders' warnings, had only watered them. As evening approached, Leila received an unexpected visitor. Hassan, the ancient archivist, arrived at her parents' home, hunched beneath the weight of a wrapped bundle. "I must speak with you," he said, his voice urgent despite its feeble quaver. "Alone," Leila led him to the small courtyard behind the house, where a worn bench beneath a twisted olive tree offered privacy from curious eyes. The elders held council after you left the square yesterday. Hassan began without preamble. Mistress Fadwa was most insistent that the traditional solution be implemented immediately, rather than waiting for the full moon cycle. Traditional solution? Leila asked, though a cold dread in her stomach suggested she already knew. Exile. Hassan confirmed, but not the gentle exile of recent generations. Fadwa argued that your case requires the ancient form abandonment in the deep desert, as was done in the oldest times. Leila's breath caught. They mean to sacrifice me to appease these supposed spirits. Yes, though they would never use such terms. Hassan unwrapped his bundle, revealing an object that made Leila gasp. It was a mirror unlike any she had seen before. Its frame was carved from black wood inlaid with mother-of-pearl in patterns, resembling constellations. The reflective surface was not glass but polished obsidian, its darkness seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. The spirit mirror, Hassan explained, one of the oldest artifacts in our archives, mentioned in the Forbidden Scrolls, but kept hidden even from most elders. According to the ancient texts, it reveals the true form of spiritual entities. Why show me this now? Because I believe Mistress Fadwa intends to use it tonight at the Elder Council. She will summon what she claims is your spirit husband to demonstrate the urgency of appeasing him. Summon? Leila repeated, incredulous. How could she summon something that doesn't exist? Hassan's rheumy eyes held hers. Who said it doesn't exist? A chill ran through Leila despite the evening's warmth. What do you mean? The forbidden texts speak of entities that do indeed respond to the summoning, rituals, ancient powerful beings that feed on human fear and devotion. Not husbands or benefactors, but parasites that have manipulated our people for generations. If this is true, Leila said slowly, then Mistress Fadwa is either dangerously deluded or knowingly serving these parasites. I believe she began as the former and became the latter. Hassan replied grimly, power corrupts, and she has held power over spiritual matters in Azahar for nearly 50 years. Leila stared at the obsidian mirror, its dark surface seeming to ripple like liquid, despite being solid stone. What would you have me do with this knowledge? Tonight, when the elders gather in the sacred cave beyond the village, you must be there with this mirror. When Fadwa performs her summoning, use the mirror as the texts describe. Turn it toward whatever appears, not away as Fadwa will instruct the council to do. What will I see? The truth, Hassan said simply, and once seen, it cannot be unseen by you or any who witness it. After the archivist departed, Leila sat alone in the courtyard, the spirit mirror heavy in her lap. The enormity of what she had learned weighed even heavier on her mind. If Hassan was right, her entire life had been shaped by a deception so profound it spanned countless generations. As twilight deepened into dusk, Leila made her decision. Wrapping the mirror carefully in its cloth, she set out toward Karim's house. If she was to confront Mistress Fadwa and the Elder Council, she would not do it alone. She found Karim in his courtyard, examining trading maps by lantern light while Tamir slept inside. His expression of pleasant surprise at seeing her quickly shifted to concern as he noted her grave demeanor. What's happened? He asked, setting aside his map. Leila told him everything, Hassan's warning, the planned sacrifice, the spirit mirror, the parasitic entities. As she spoke, Karim's face hardened with resolve. I've suspected something like this, he admitted when she had finished. In my travels, I've heard whispers of desert spirits that prey on isolated communities, encouraging practices that keep them isolated and fearful. But to think that our own elders knowingly perpetuate such exploitation. Not all of them know, Leila said. Hassan believes most are as deceived as the rest of the village. What do you intend to do? Leila unwrapped the spirit mirror, its obsidian surface gleaming in the lantern light. I intend to show everyone the truth tonight. Will you come with me? Karim studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll arrange for my sister to watch Tamir. This is too dangerous to bring him along." As they prepared to depart, Karim took Leila's hand, his expression solemn. "Whatever we discover tonight, know this: you have already shown more courage than most show in a lifetime. The mark behind your ear does not define you. Your choices do." His words warmed something deep within Leila, a certainty that had been growing since the moment she first questioned her predetermined path. Whether spirit husband or parasite, whether tradition or deception, she would face the truth with open eyes and decide her own fate, once and for all. Night had fallen completely by the time Leila and Karim approached the sacred cave. Located in a rocky outcropping beyond the village eastern edge, the cave had served as the elders' private council chamber for matters too sensitive or sacred for public discussion. "I've never been permitted inside," Leila whispered, as they crouched behind a large boulder, observing the cave entrance from a distance. "Only elders and those they summon may enter." Yet another way to maintain their exclusive control of knowledge. Karim replied, his voice equally low. "Are you certain you wish to proceed? Once we challenge Fadwa openly, there will be no turning back." Leila clutched the spirit mirror, wrapped in its protective cloth. "I've spent my entire life preparing to meet a spirit husband. If these entities exist, but are not what we've been told, I need to know. The village needs to know." A small procession of robed figures approached the cave, illuminated by torches that cast long, dancing shadows across the desert landscape. Leila recognized the distinctive silhouettes of the village elders, led by Mistress Fadwa's hunched form. 12 elders, Karim counted. "Plus Fadwa, we are significantly outnumbered." "We don't need to overpower them," Leila reminded him, "only to reveal the truth." They waited until the procession had entered the cave, then crept closer. From their new position, they could see flickering light from within and hear the low murmur of voices echoing against stone walls. "Now we need a distraction," Karim said. "Something to draw their attention while we slip inside." As if in answer to his words, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the desert. Both turned to see another storm gathering on the horizon, far more ominous than the previous day's rainfall. Lightning forked across the black clouds, briefly illuminating the landscape in stark white light. "Another storm," Leila whispered. "2 in as many days, after years of drought." "Natural phenomena," Karim insisted, though his voice held a note of uncertainty. Nothing more. But Leila wasn't so sure. The timing seemed too perfect, the gathering darkness too complete. As they watched, the storm front advanced with unnatural speed, swallowing stars as it approached. "We should move now," she said, "while they're still settling in, and before that storm reaches us." They approached the cave entrance cautiously. No guards had been posted. The elders' authority was so absolute in Azahar that they never expected to be observed or challenged in their sacred space. Just inside the entrance, Leila and Karim pressed themselves against the rough stone wall, hidden in shadows as they took in the scene before them. The cave opened into a roughly circular chamber where the elders sat in a ring around a central fire pit. Mistress Fadwa stood at the far side of the circle, her back to a deeper recess in the cave where ancient symbols had been carved into the living rock. "The signs are undeniable," she was saying, her voice carrying clearly in the enclosed space. "The rejected spirit husband grows restless. Already his displeasure manifests in unnatural weather, failed crops and sickened annals." "But rain has come," objected one of the younger elders. "Surely that is a blessing, not a curse." "Fool," Fadwa snapped. "The rain is but a prelude to greater devastation. The spirits toy with us, giving with one hand while preparing to take with the other." She moved to a small altar beside the fire pit, where various ritual objects had been arranged. "Tonight I will summon the spirit husband that Leila has rejected. You will see his wrath for yourselves and understand why we must revert to the ancient ways of appeasement." "Exile?" asked an elderly woman, her voice trembling. "Or the final sacrifice?" The spirits will make their demands known, Fadwa replied evasively. Leila felt Karim tense beside her. His hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing gently in reassurance. Fadwa began a slow, rhythmic chant in a language Leila recognized from her training. Ancient words of summoning and binding. The fire in the pit flared suddenly higher, its flames shifting from orange to an unnatural blue-green that cast sickly light across the elders' apprehensive faces. Outside the cave, the storm had arrived. Wind howled at the entrance, and the sound of heavy rain created a percussive backdrop to Fadwa's chanting. Lightning struck nearby with a deafening crack, causing several elders to cry out in alarm. "The spirit approaches," Fadwa announced, her voice rising with fervent intensity. "Prepare yourselves to witness his glory, but do not look directly upon his form, lest your mortal eyes be burned from their sockets." The elders bowed their heads obediently, staring at the ground as Fadwa intensified her chant. The strange fire danced and twisted, stretching toward the cave's ceiling like a living thing seeking escape. Within that fire, something began to take shape, a darkness that absorbed the unnatural light, a form both there and not there, substantial yet ethereal. "Great One," Fadwa addressed the manifesting entity, "we acknowledge your right to claim your bride. Show us how we may appease your justified wrath." The shape in the fire pulsed, expanding outward. A sound filled the cave, not quite a voice, but a vibration that resonated in bone and blood rather than air. Though wordless, its meaning was somehow clear to all who heard it. Hunger, desire, ancient and patient malevolence. One of the elders, unable to resist, glanced up at the manifestation and immediately collapsed, his body convulsing against the stone floor. "Keep your eyes averted," Fadwa commanded sharply. "His power is too great for mortal comprehension." Leila felt the spirit mirror grow warm against her chest, where she had hidden it beneath her robe. Now was the moment Hassan had prepared her for. She stepped forward into the circle of firelight, drawing the mirror from its wrappings as she moved. "No," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the entity's disturbing vibrations. "Look directly at it. See the truth with your own eyes." Every head turned toward her in shock. Mistress Fadwa's face contorted with rage and fear. "Blasphemer," the old woman shrieked. "How dare you intrude upon sacred rites?" But Leila's attention was fixed on the shape within the flames. She raised the obsidian mirror, its black surface reflecting the entity's form with perfect, terrible clarity. "Behold," she said to the stunned elders, "your spirit husband." In the obsidian mirror's reflection, the entity's true form became horrifyingly clear. Not the noble spirit husband of village legend, but a writhing mass of darkness, punctuated by dozens of hungry eyes and grasping appendages that seemed to reach out from the mirror's surface. Its body, if such a term applied, shifted constantly, never settling into a single shape, but suggesting something ancient and utterly inhuman. Gasps of horror erupted from the elders. Several scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the cave walls. "Lies!" Mistress Fadwa shrieked, lunging toward Leila. "The mirror deceives. Lower it at once." But Karim stepped forward, placing himself between Leila and the enraged elder. "Let them see," he said firmly. "Let all of Azahar see what they've been sacrificing their daughters to for generations." The entity in the fire pulsed with apparent anger, its vibrations becoming a painful pressure against everyone's ears. The flames shot higher, licking at the cave ceiling and sending shadows dancing across the terrified faces of the council. "Great One," Fadwa addressed the entity, falling to her knees, "forgive this sacrilege. The girl knows not what she does, but you do, don't you?" Leila challenged, holding the mirror higher. "You've known all along what these spirit husbands truly are." The old woman's face contorted with conflicting emotions. Fear, rage, and something deeper that might have been shame. "You understand nothing," she hissed. "The covenant must be maintained. It has kept Azahar safe for 1,000 years. Safe," Karim interjected, "or isolated." controlled, frozen in time, while the world beyond progresses. One of the male elders, braver than the rest, stepped closer to examine the entity's reflection in the mirror. His weathered face paled. "This cannot be what we have served all these generations," he whispered. "This is no beneficent spirit. It is what it has always been," Fadwa snapped. "A power beyond human comprehension. Does a desert jackal understand the hunter who pursues it? Does the hunted question the right of the hunter to sustain himself with its flesh?" The entity's form expanded suddenly, pushing against the confines of the fire. Several tendrils of darkness extended toward Leila, drawn to the crescent birthmark behind her ear that now burned with unusual heat. "It knows you," Fadwa said, a terrible smile spreading across her ancient face. "It has always known you, from the moment of your birth. The mark is its claim upon you." Leila stood her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. "The mark is a birthmark, nothing more. Any meaning assigned to it was human interpretation, not spiritual destiny." "Then why does it reach for you, even now?" Fadwa challenged. It was true. The entity's attention seemed fixed on Leila, its multiple eyes blinking in unsettling patterns as its tendrils stretched toward her. She could feel its hunger, ancient and patient, but now edged with urgency. "Because it feeds on fear and belief," Karim said suddenly. "And you've spent her entire life preparing her to fear and worship it." Something in his words struck Leila with the force of revelation. Throughout her training, Mistress Fadwa had emphasized one principle above all others: unquestioning belief in the spirit, husband's existence, in his right to claim her, in the honor of being chosen. "Faith," she whispered, "that's what sustains it, isn't it? Not just the physical sacrifice of spirit brides, but the collective belief of an entire village." Fadwa's expression confirmed the truth before she could deny it. In that moment of realization, Leila felt the birthmark's burning sensation intensify, as if the entity were trying to strengthen its claim upon her. Outside the cave, the storm had reached its peak. Lightning struck so frequently that the cave entrance flickered with constant illumination. Rain poured down in sheets, and wind howled like a living thing in pain. "The binding chains," Leila said suddenly, remembering another artifact mentioned in her studies. "Where are they kept?" Fadwa's eyes widened in alarm. "You would not dare." "The silver chains inscribed with the ancient wards," Leila persisted, addressing the other elders. "The texts say they were forged to contain spirits that grew too powerful, too hungry." "In the inner sanctum," the brave elder who had looked in the mirror replied, pointing to the deepest recess of the cave, behind the stone of offering. "Traitor!" Fadwa spat, but her authority was clearly waning, as the other elders began to see the truth of what they had served. Karim moved quickly toward the inner sanctum, but the entity reacted with surprising speed. A tendril of darkness shot from the fire, wrapping around his ankle and sending him crashing to the stone floor. "Father," came a young voice from the cave entrance. All heads turned to see Tamir standing there, his small figure silhouetted against the storm-racked night. His eyes were wide with terror as he took in the unnatural fire and the writhing darkness within it. The tendril that held his father pinned to the ground. "Tamir, run!" Karim shouted, struggling against the entity's grip. But instead of fleeing, the boy darted forward into the cave, evading the grasping hands of startled elders. He reached his father's side, tugging futilely at the shadowy tendril. The entity's attention shifted. Multiple eyes blinked toward the child, and a new hunger emanated from its amorphous form. Children, with their capacity for pure belief untempered by adult skepticism, were clearly a delicacy it rarely encountered. "No," Leila cried, interposing herself between the entity and Tamir. "You cannot have him." The entity's vibrations changed tone, becoming almost mocking. A tendril reached for her, brushing against the crescent mark behind her ear. At its touch, visions flooded. Leila's mind, power beyond mortal imagining, knowledge realms beyond the physical, immortality of a sort as her consciousness would be absorbed into the entity's own. These were the true promises of a spirit husband, not the sanitized version taught to generations of spirit brides. Not death, but a transformation so complete it would erase her humanity entirely. Leila recoiled from the offered visions. "I reject you," she said clearly. "Now and forever. You have no claim on me or anyone in Azahar." The entity's form contracted violently, then expanded in what could only be interpreted as rage. The blue-green flame surged outward, forcing everyone to retreat further against the cave wall. Everyone except Mistress Fadwa, who stood her ground at the edge of the fire pit, her face illuminated by the unnatural light. For the first time, Leila noticed something she had never seen before, a small crescent-shaped scar behind the elder's ear, nearly identical to Leila's birthmark, but long healed over. "You were a spirit bride," Leila whispered in sudden understanding. "You were chosen. Just like me." Mistress Fadwa's eyes narrowed at Leila's realization. "Yes," she admitted, her voice oddly calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "I was chosen, just as you were, but unlike you, I had the wisdom to understand the true bargain being offered." "What bargain?" Leila demanded, still holding the spirit mirror between herself and the entity. "Power, knowledge, a form of immortality." Fadwa gestured toward the writhing darkness. "I was to be sacrificed like all the others, abandoned in the deep desert to die. But I found another way. I offered the entity a partnership instead of submission." "You've been feeding it," Karim said, still struggling against the tendril that bound him. "Not just spirit brides, but the fear and devotion of the entire village." "A necessary arrangement," Fadwa insisted. "In exchange, Azahar has prospered, while other desert villages withered. Our wells remained full during droughts. Our children survived illnesses that decimated other communities." One of the elders, an elderly woman who had always been Fadwa's closest ally, stepped forward. "Is this true, Fadwa? You've known the true nature of the spirit husbands all along." "I've known what needed to be known to ensure our survival," Fadwa replied sharply. "The entity requires sustenance, belief, devotion, and occasionally a spirit bride whose life force is particularly compatible with its essence." "Murder," Leila said flatly. "You've been murdering young women for decades." "Sacrifice," Fadwa corrected. "A small price for the village's continued existence. And not all brides were sacrificed. Some, like me, proved useful in other ways." The entity pulsed, its vibrations becoming more insistent. The tendrils holding Karim tightened, causing him to gasp in pain. "It grows impatient," Fadwa observed. "It has waited for you for 21 years, Leila. Your mark is the strongest I've ever seen. The entity sensed your potential from birth. A perfect vessel, a perfect source of sustenance." Tamir, still at his father's side, looked up at Leila with terrified eyes. "Don't let it take my father," he pleaded. Something hardened in Leila at the boy's words. She had spent her life in passive preparation, accepting the path laid out for her. But now, faced with the truth and with those she had come to care for in danger, passivity was no longer an option. "The binding chains," she said to the elder, who had spoken earlier. "Get them, now." The man hesitated only briefly before hurrying toward the inner sanctum. Fadwa made to intercept him, but two other elders moved to block her path, their expressions resolute. "This ends tonight," one of them declared. Fadwa's face contorted with rage. "Fools! Without the entity's protection, Azahar will wither and die. Better to face the desert's natural challenges than continue this abomination," replied the elder. The entity seemed to sense the shifting tide. Its form contracted, then expanded violently, sending tendrils lashing out in all directions. Several elders were struck, falling to the ground with cries of pain. The unnatural fire flared higher, threatening to engulf the entire chamber. "Tamir, stay down," Karim shouted as a tendril whipped over their heads. Leila held the spirit mirror firmly, using its reflective surface to track the entity's movements. When a tendril shot toward her, she raised the mirror to intercept it. The darkness recoiled from its own reflection with a vibration that sounded almost like a scream. It fears the mirror, she realized aloud. It cannot bear to see its true form. The elder returned from the inner sanctum, carrying a bundle of tarnished silver chains inscribed with symbols similar to those carved into the cave walls. "The binding chains," he announced, holding them out to Leila. She reached for them, but Fadwa moved with surprising speed for one so old, snatching the chains from the elder's hands. "I will not allow you to destroy what I have spent a lifetime building," she snarled. "It was never yours to build," Leila replied, advancing on the older woman. "You perverted our traditions, sacrificed innocent girls, all to maintain your own power." "I preserved our village." Fadwa's voice rose to a shriek. "What have you ever done but question and doubt?" The entity pulsed again, more tendrils extending from the fire. One wrapped around Tamir's small ankle, dragging him away from his father. The boy screamed, clawing at the stone floor as he was pulled toward the writhing darkness. Karim redoubled his efforts to break free, but the tendril holding him only tightened further. Something snapped inside Leila at the sound of the child's terror. The crescent birthmark behind her ear burned with sudden intensity, not with the entity's claim, but with her own power, awakening. She had been marked, not as a victim, but as one who could stand against the darkness. With a cry that came from the depths of her being, Leila lunged forward, tackling Fadwa to the ground. The binding chains scattered across the stone floor, with a musical chiming that cut through the entity's vibrations. "Your time is over, old woman," Leila said, pinning Fadwa beneath her. "The truth is revealed. Your power is broken." As if responding to her words, the birthmark flared with silver light that spread outward, illuminating the cave with a radiance that pushed back the unnatural fire. The entity recoiled, its tendrils releasing both Karim and Tamir as it contracted into a dense knot of darkness at the center of the fire pit. Leila gathered the binding chains, their silver links warm against her skin. The ancient symbols carved into each link seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, resonating with the power emanating from her birthmark. The mark was never the entity's claim, she realized. It was a warning, sign of those born with the ability to bind these creatures, not submit to them. Fadwa's eyes widened with the first real fear Leila had ever seen in them. "No," she whispered, "it cannot be." But Leila knew the truth now. Every movement came with instinctive certainty as she approached the fire pit, the chains unwinding in her hands like living silver serpents. The entity tried to retreat deeper into the flames, but the silver light from Leila's birthmark held it in place. "You have no power here anymore," she told it, her voice ringing with authority that surprised even her. "Your deception is ended. Your covenant with Azahar is broken." She cast the chains into the fire. Instead of melting, they seemed to come alive, wrapping themselves around the dense knot of darkness, binding it tighter and tighter as the ancient symbols glowed with increasing brightness. Outside, the storm reached a crescendo. Lightning struck the cave entrance, sending stone fragments flying. Thunder shook the very foundations of the mountain. Within the fire pit, the bound entity writhed and pulsed, its vibrations becoming a discordant scream that threatened to shatter bone and sanity alike. And through it all, Leila stood firm, the silver light of her birthmark, blazing like a star fallen to earth, claiming her true inheritance at last. Dawn broke over Azahar, painting the desert in hues of gold and amber. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape, not physically with pools of water gathering in depressions that had been dry for generations, but spiritually as well. In the village square, the elders gathered with the rest of the community. The events in the sacred cave had been recounted to all, though many still struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the deception that had shaped their lives for centuries. At the center of the gathering stood Leila, changed in ways both visible and invisible. The crescent birthmark behind her ear now shimmered with a subtle silver light that waxed and waned with the phases of the moon. More profound was the change in her bearing. Gone was the passive acceptance that had characterized her life as a spirit bride. In its place was a quiet confidence, a certainty of purpose. Beside her stood Karim and Tamer, the boy clutching his father's hand, while occasionally reaching out to touch Leila's robe, as if reassuring himself of her continued presence. Mistress Fadwa knelt before the assembled village, her ancient face a mask of defiance, despite her defeat. The other elders had confined her after the confrontation in the cave, though not before she had attempted one final desperate effort to free the entity from its silver chains. "Azahar has survived for 1,000 years because of the covenant I maintained," she insisted, addressing the gathered villagers rather than the elders who sat in judgment. "Without the entity's protection, the desert will reclaim this place as it has so many others. We would rather face the desert's natural challenges than continue to sacrifice our daughters to a parasite," replied the eldest of the remaining council members, an old man named Jabari, who had been among the first to support Leila in the cave. "And what of the entity?" asked a villager from the crowd. "Where is it now?" All eyes turned to Leila, who had been the one to bind the creature with the ancient silver chains. "Contained," she answered simply. "Sealed away in the deepest part of the sacred cave, bound by chains that will hold it for generations to come. And if it breaks free," Mistress Fadwa challenged, a gleam of hope in her rheumy eyes, "then those who bear the mark will bind it again," Leila replied, touching the crescent behind her ear. "I understand now what this truly means. Not a claim placed upon us, but a gift passed down through bloodlines, the ability to see these entities for what they are, and the power to contain them." Murmurs spread through the crowd as this new interpretation of the ancient mark settled into their understanding. Elder Jabari raised his hands for silence. "We have deliberated through the night on how to proceed. Mistress Fadwa has betrayed the trust of this village for longer than most of us have been alive. For her crimes, the sacrifice of countless spirit brides, the knowing partnership with an entity that fed on our reverence and devotion, she is hereby exiled from Azahar." Gasps and whispers greeted this pronouncement. Exile was considered a fate worse than death in their desert community. Unlike the spirit brides she condemned, Jabari continued, "She will be given provisions, water, and a map to the nearest village. Her fate beyond our boundaries will be her own to determine." Fadwa's face contorted with rage and fear. "You cannot cast me out. I am Azahar. I have preserved this village when all others would have let it perish." "You preserved it at too high a cost," Leila said quietly. "The lives of innocent girls, the truth of our history, the freedom to determine our own path without fear or superstition." Two village guards stepped forward to escort Fadwa away. As she passed Leila, the old woman paused, her eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and something that might have been grudging respect. "You will learn," she hissed. "When the wells run dry and the crops fail, when children sicken and die, you will understand what I sacrificed for." "If those things come to pass," Leila replied steadily, "we will face them together, as a community, not through deception and sacrifice." After Fadwa had been led away, Elder Jabari turned to address Leila. "The council has another matter to resolve: the status of the last spirit bride." A hush fell over the gathering. Leila felt Karim tense beside her, Tamir's small hand tightening around hers. "As the traditional path has been revealed as a deception," Jabari continued, "you are released from all obligations as a spirit bride. Your life is now your own to determine." Relief washed through Leila, though in truth she had already claimed this freedom for herself the moment she had confronted the entity in the cave. "Furthermore," Jabari said, "the council recognizes your true gift, not as a sacrifice to spirits, but as a protector against them. We would ask that you consider training others who may carry similar marks to ensure Azahar remains safe in generations to come." Leila nodded her acceptance of this new role, I will teach what I have learned, the truth about the marks, the entities and the power to bind them. As the formal proceedings concluded, villagers dispersed to begin the day's work. Many approached Leila to express gratitude or ask questions about the new understanding of their village's history. Through it all, Karam remained at her side, a steady presence in a world transformed. When they finally had a moment alone, he turned to her with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Now that you are free to choose your own path," he said carefully, "I would not presume to." Leila silenced him with a smile. "Tamir asked me a question 5 days ago at the altar. I believe I'm finally ready to answer it." Karam's eyes widened in understanding just as Tamir bounded back to them, having momentarily chased after a friend. "What question?" the boy asked, catching the end of their conversation. Leila knelt to meet his eye. "You asked if I would marry your father instead of a spirit husband. Is that still what you want?" Tamir's face lit up with joy. "Yes, more than anything." Leila looked up at Karam, whose expression held both hope and wonder. "And you? Is it what you want as well?" "Since the moment you spoke kindly to my son at the altar," he admitted, "but I would never have presumed to." Once again Leila interrupted him, this time by taking his hand. "I spent my life preparing for a union with something that never truly existed as I imagined it. Now I find myself drawn to something far more real, more human, and infinitely more precious." 3 weeks later, Azahar witnessed a different kind of ceremony in the village square. No ancient rituals or spirit invocations, but a simple exchange of vows between a woman who had once been destined for a spirit husband and a merchant who had dared to question tradition. Tamir stood proudly beside them, beaming as Leila placed a ring on his father's finger, a ring forged from a link of the very chains that had bound the entity, symbolizing not captivity but the freedom that comes from facing truth without fear. As sunset painted the desert gold, Leila touched the silver crescent behind her ear, no longer a mark of claimed ownership, but a symbol of her own power and choice. The path ahead would not be easy. Azahar would need to find new ways to survive the desert's harshness without supernatural intervention, but they would face these challenges together, guided by truth rather than fear, by love rather than sacrifice. And in the deep desert beyond the village boundaries, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, a small figure paused in her journey of exile. Mistress Fadwa turned to look back at the home she would never see again, her wizened face illuminated by the rising moon, a perfect crescent, just like the mark she shared with the girl who had ended her reign. "We shall see," she whispered to the indifferent stars. "We shall see whose path brings true salvation." Then she turned and continued into the vast, empty desert, leaving Azahar and its transformed future behind.